Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Sober is Dope podcast. I'm your host, Pop Buchanan, and today I have one of my special guests. This guy has been instrumental in my journey. He was the first person to bring me on his podcast. I consider him both a friend and a mentor, and we have the amazing MartinJon Garcia on the podcast today. Martin is a healer, artist, teacher, and a certified Reiki Master. Martin, how are you doing today?
Oh, today has been a real good day. Real good.
Yes. Hey, we live this one day at a time lifestyle, so we have to make the most of it. Martin, for people who don't know, you are the host of the Recover Yourself podcast. You're a recovery mentor. You have 19 years sobriety, and this December is going to make 20 years. So again, when I first met you, you reached out to me and you gave me a platform when I didn't really have one before I even, you was just like, I want to interview you, right? And that meant a lot to me. And so for everyone that knows you as the recovery mentor, can we take it back a bit? Can you tell us about your origin story, how you found your sobriety, and what that looked like almost 20 years ago during Y2K when you decided that you was going to take that step to find your recovery?
Well, yeah, it was a long journey. Let me kind of wrap my head around that question, because you got to understand, when I talk about recover yourself, I'm talking about where we're going, not where we're coming from. So I don't often look over my shoulder at what's back there. Not that I'm afraid of it. I dealt with that shit and we move forward.
That's
I ain't
right.
got to relive that, right?
Yeah,
So I'm going to
exactly.
go ahead, just kind of like cherry pick some stuff for you. So I
Okay.
started drinking using 13, 14, right? 13,
Okay.
14 years old. I was drinking and using cocaine. And and that 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 really sort of helped me escape from everything that I wasn't, but everybody else wanted me to be.
Okay.
One of the big things that I realized is that I wasn't good in school. I wasn't good at testing. I wasn't good at sports. I wasn't good at all of the things that I was expected to be good at by being either male or um, or just a person, right? Like, you need to be good at school or you're going to be a bum, right? And that was a big word that my dad used to call me all the time, right? You're a bum, you're never going to amount to anything, all this kind of stuff. So I really brought that in. When my dad left, my parents got divorced, my dad left, and that's what made me start really just kind of like, oh, I got space. And my dad was an alcoholic as far as I'm concerned when I was a kid. So like, I don't know that he would have considered himself one, but right, like there was alcohol everywhere. I was the beer fetcher, right? Like,
Yeah.
I was the person that, like, he would turn to. So you know at 13 I started drinking and I started seeing someone, we started doing coke, and then there was all of this other stuff, right? Like, then that's when I started to really be like, I fit in by not fitting in. And I doubled down. I would double down on that, like, like that lifestyle of just like, well, you're nothing, so it doesn't matter. And then I was told at 18 that I should probably think about going to an AA meeting.
Okay.
And that's when I went to my first AA meeting, and that didn't solidify until 2000. So I was 25. Now, I went to that meeting, and it just started weaving me in and out of sobriety, using sobriety, using sobriety, using. And my sobriety wasn't about building anything. It was all this surface sort of work of like, well, I just won't use, and that's fine.
Correct.
During that time, I was hospitalized for malnutrition, dehydration, because when I didn't have my drugs, alcohol, or whatever, I would stop eating because I could control that. I would punish myself for eating poorly by not eating for days. So that was something that really started to show itself. Like, my the real disgust for myself. I also became a cutter during that time, so I cut myself quite a bit. And addicted to all sorts of stuff like porn. And then I started utilizing gambling as another behavioral addiction that
Yes.
I would gamble quite a bit. Then I had found a time between 1999 and 2000 that I had a year sober. And I started to feel like I was thinking clearly. And what happened was one night I decided, okay, well, I'm going to have a glass of wine with dinner. I drank 3 bottles of wine, and I didn't have 3 bottles of wine that night. I had one, and I finished that, and I don't recall going out and getting more. I just did. And the next day I woke up, my bathroom was full of Merlot and like red wine and like whatever. And I was like, something is missing with sobriety. Something is missing, right? Like there was a point, and that was when I really internalized this idea of recovering too. I was like, well, it's not about running from something; it's about moving towards something.
Yes.
And that is when my sobriety really solidified, because it was no longer about the expectations of others, someone telling me I should go to an AA meeting. What do I look like externally? What am I, what am I doing, like in this external way? Because I was an artist, and and I was just like, this is what artists do with like whatever, like all of this story stuff. And it was all about image, and it was all about all of these other things. And one of the images was that was one that I didn't want to look at, which was the image of me looking at me and drinking and using and all of that. And I was like, well, if I want to eventually look at myself, I have to move towards being a person that I want to look at.
Right. That's heavy. So you have to be able to do that introspection. And most people don't want to look at that, the real deep aspects of themselves, right? It's that those scary parts of yourself when you look it in the mirror and you have to do that real work. I love that. Before we actually met, I never really thought about my recovery as me recovering from this so-called addiction and darkness and recovering to anything. I was stuck in kind of like that medium of maintenance, right? Just maintaining, right? And now that I think about it, over the years, it makes sense, because it's kind of like, it's not a clear destination point. You really don't know where you're going. You're just focusing on the present. And we're taught one day at a time, focus on it now, and it gets hard. Every day you have to maintain the sobriety. So recovering too. When we first spoke, I was talking about recovering to a better spiritual person, a more enlightened person, a more fulfilled person. In general, throughout your years of asking the question and posing it to different people, do you have a general idea of what we may need to focus on and what we should be recovering to? Is that, I know it's broad, but it's broad.
But it's broad because we're all different.
We're all different, correct?
Right? Like I just interviewed Barbie the welder, and she's drinking again.
Okay.
Good on you. What? Like, ain't my path.
Yeah, correct.
Whatever. Like, like you want that, like go do it. Like I don't, like good. And she talks about how she changed her mindset. The reason she drank before was because she hated herself. The reason she drinks now is social.
Okay.
Right? She doesn't mind it. It's not something that's getting out of control. It's not something that currently, and maybe it will, but is that wrong?
Right. No, no one can say
my addiction got me here, and I'm in a fucking good place, right?
You're in a good place, right. And for every person, I always tell people, and when I was like, your story, by the way, your year one story is the classic point of reference for people in recovery who has these thoughts. They play with these sexy thoughts of what if, right? They try to, what if I could just have one drink? And they try to normalize addiction. Like, maybe I could have one drink of wine for dinner. It always seems sexy and safe when you're in a place of recovery, right? But as soon as you start to imbibe, you clearly realize, you realize really fast, wait a minute, I'm messed up. And that was my case. Like every time I relapsed, it came from this so-called innocent place, right? This place,
Yeah.
you know what, I feel better now. When I tell people you're in recovery, you find power. There's power there. And that power could feed on the insidious nature of your addiction that, plays with your mind. So be careful. So in my case, when I started thinking about what I'm recovering to, it's being at peace with my recovery and sobriety, right? Not no longer needing to play with the idea, being absolute about my position, because I know in my case, I can't drink. Now, there's some Barbie the Bewelder, in her case, she could have been a person who may have had struggles with alcohol, but may not have the disease, her brain may have not been like ours, may not have the full blown, I don't know. Everyone's different, right? But I know if I have a drink, my life totally shuts down, my mind, and I totally transform into something really ugly. And that's me doing the self-introspection. So that's what I love about what you're helping people do. You're helping people look at their self, right? And that's so important. I mean, and 19 years. So what I want to get into a bit, like you have this wealth of knowledge. I'm at year 8, right? So my recovery journey is different. I know you don't like looking back, but it's important for perspective right now, where the whole community is. I'm looking at you as authority here because you have 19 years, and that's something I pray for, right? I pray that I could get to year 10. I'm looking at December 15th so I could get to my year 8. And if you notice online, I'm still at year 7, but I'm screaming year 8 all over the place because I like thinking forward. I'm thinking forward, right? Once I get past that half year mark, for me, I'm 8 years sober, right?
Right.
So for you, when you got to your 8 to 10 year mark, right? So we know first, let's go here. Your first year, you drank the wine, then you said, wait a minute, let me pull back and do the spiritual work. Let me look at myself and let me heal the underlying causes, right? So what changed then that allowed you to go from relapsing in year 1 to now being at year 18 with all of this success? What was the change in your mind? Like what made it so permanent where you didn't relapse for 18 years?
That's a good question. Give me a minute.
Yeah, take your time.
So a lot. So I'm gonna jive on some stuff. So a lot of this, like, don't forget, like, although I haven't touched drugs and alcohol, doesn't mean I didn't gamble. Doesn't mean I didn't smoke. Right? Doesn't mean I didn't like that shit's important too. Like, it doesn't mean I didn't overdose on coffee. Right? Like I had this, shakes and shit. Like all sorts of stuff. Right? Like I touched on a lot in order to get through what I would consider early sobriety, year 1 to 5.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. Year 1 to 5 sucks.
Yes.
Because yes, there's good times in there and stuff, and there's all this stuff, but 1 to 5 for me, and this is just my experience, and numbers don't matter. And I want to, a lot of people are like, numbers, I could get, it's like, yes, okay, go do that. But the shit you got to learn. And I believe that there is a chemical balance that has to happen in your mind. And alcohol needs some time your body needs time to repair from the alcohol damage that you've brought in. Correct. Period. Absolutely. I don't care if you don't have a alcohol problem. If you drink alcohol regularly, even like twice a week or whatever, your body is being shut down for that time, and your ability to access the spiritual stuff that you and I talked about when we talked about above and below the line creativity, right? Yes, like that, like the veil between you and higher consciousness, that is being blocked off. Whether you're taking tobacco or alcohol or drugs or whatever, that's being shut down to an extent. Correct. And so just getting through those 5 years, the only thing that was important was getting time. And so I utilized, going to meetings, because that was the only game in town. Okay. As a way to keep me sober. And it was all about shame. If I had to show up at a meeting and had drunk, I wasn't going to be able to lie,
Right.
right?
You
I
can't
couldn't
fool
look
it.
them in the eye.
Yeah.
So I had to go.
Right.
So just going regularly kept me sober. And that was really it. Like there like during that time, was there a big spiritual awakening? I mean, I made artworks and I made all these sorts of things to help me communicate in a way that was nonverbal and nonlinear, right? Like I was in communication with myself in some way, and I just had to be open and have faith
Right.
that that was moving me towards something. Year 1 to 5, I don't even know what the hell was going on, right? Like
Right.
I was still engaged in activities. I had a friend who was also sober, and she was an artist, and we lived together, and so that made it easy, right? I had somebody. But I live in a big city, right? I live in Chicago, so all of a sudden, like having somebody that's sober, I mean, you can swing a cat and find a sober person when you're around this many people,
Right.
you know. um and so that was a big win. And and she had a handful of years already, and so I had a mentor. Like, she wasn't my sponsor, because I needed relationships outside of the rooms. I needed relationships um outside of recovery. It's interesting, like putting out an email tomorrow that brings in the phrase, the quote from this woman I interviewed, April Garfoli, that says, you know recovery is not meant to be your life. It's meant to give you your life back.
I love it. I love it.
Right. And
Wow.
that's such a big deal. Like I gave up everything for my drinking.
Right.
Right. Now, I gave up everything for my drinking, but really all of the things that I were given up before I took my first drink, which is why taking that first drink turned into me giving everything up. Like, and I was ready to give it up permanently.
You're right.
Until I stopped.
Until you stop. That's powerful, man. That's so powerful. I mean, for me, I think, and I tell people this all the time when I'm, the first 1 to 5 years, like you were talking about, we experience a lot of post-acute withdrawal symptoms. The brain is healing specifically, and that takes time, because we know when we drink alcohol, the alcohol floods our brain with dopamine, and the end result is it reduces the dopamine receptors. Our dopamine receptors are kind of like damaged, so to say. So the way your brain's relationship to dopamine is totally upside down. And when you stop, your dopamine receptors now are working to get back to a healthy state. And this is where the mental health comes in, because the moment your neurotransmitter hormones like dopamine or something drop to an unhealthy level, you're automatically into a mental health diagnosis. That's like comorbidity. That's why I tell people alcohol is a depressant. So the one thing it does really well is depresses us, whether it's consciously or subconsciously. And when we stop, it crashes even more. So we're dealing with this depression, we're dealing with the sadness, this uncertainty, this confusion, this vagueness, and we're just trying to go through the motion. So for me, the first 5 years, I developed pre-diabetes because I was just doing everything but drinking. And in my mind, that was okay, because my drinking was the demon I could see. That was the demon I knew that I had to run from. So as my brain healing was like, okay, we need glucose, we need sugar, we need carbs, we need everything, we need rest. One thing that I'm not sure, you never did rehab, right? Did you have to go to rehab, or did you?
I never had to do rehab. My detox was done on my own, and it was painful.
Wow, that's tough. That's tough.
And it was now, when I quit for good, I only had drunk one day 3 bottles of wine,
Okay.
MBD. I can get over that. Like,
right.
like I'm still young, right?
Yeah.
The detox that I had to go through the year prior
Right.
was bad, because I was using and drinking quite a bit for quite a while. At that point, I was going through about a fifth of vodka a day.
Wow. Okay.
So I quit, and I was cool. Like, my liver and my kidneys and stuff, they were cool because I was
Okay.
young still.
Yeah.
But I remember when I quit, like before I quit, I did have organ pain,
Okay.
right? So I eventually quit. Um, and I'd gone probably about 2 weeks of just being like super, super edgy, and like my nervous system was fucked. And
Yeah.
I didn't really know what was going on because it, the information wasn't there. I mean, we're talking 2000, right? The
Yeah.
internet was around, but all I did was fucking like play Sim City or some shit,
Yeah.
like, so it
Right.
wasn't like it
Yeah.
wasn't like it is today with
No.
information, especially when the only game, it wasn't the only game in town necessarily, but the only one that I knew of was AA, and they weren't
Right.
just fucking like, I mean, and I was in AA, but
Right.
everyone was just like, no, you got this, like that kind of attitude. So it was
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah. Well, it's incredible because a lot of what you were doing, like you was like leaning on the coffee, leaning on this, leaning on that, and you was doing what you needed to do because somehow, whether it was conscious or subconscious, you knew I have to do whatever it takes to not do these two things, to use and drink. And
Right.
then you got yourself on, and then later on you develop this consciousness like, well, now I want to like work on my health and maybe address these other things. Like now I'm still working on the coffee. Like today is day 3 or 4 where I'm just like, wait a minute. Um, at home because of COVID-19, so I'll get to work from home and stuff like that. I'm not out every day. Why am I drinking coffee? I was getting up as if I had a straight 9 to 5 and had to stay on the road all day. I'm still knocking down the coffee. And then when I stopped, I realized I was detoxing. I was going through a state of detox. I said, wait a minute, this can't be good if I'm detoxing from it, right? If I
Mhm.
decide to stop drinking soda or something, the sugar crash should be there, but the coffee, I'm experiencing sweats, broke out a little bit, a little agitated, sleep patterns upside down. I'm going to bed at 5 in the morning and waking up at 5 in the evening and then doing that over and over again. So I said, wait a minute, something's a little bit upside down. So I had to put things in perspective. So that brings me to this point. We get to a point in our recovery where we develop a consciousness where now we have to pay attention to maybe other things that we are maybe developing an addiction to because we have an addictive personality. So in your case, it was gambling. In my case, it was sports betting and stuff like that. I have a big problem with
Mhm.
that. I got to work on, right? Then it was the coffee. And then I gave up the cigarettes, thank God. But that was it. The first 4 years was just 2, 3 packs of cigarettes a day, coffee.
Fine.
Yeah, fine, right?
Fine. What happened?
And then we had this running joke outside of AA that when I was in rehab, some of the guys who was just more health conscious, they used to say, you guys are going to AA to stop drinking, but you're gonna die of lung
Yeah.
cancer because you're outside smoking all day and eating donuts and drinking coffee. So no
Mhm.
knock to AA, but it's that psychological thing. Like, is that sustainable, right? Can I stay sober and smoke cigarettes and drink coffee every day, and how's that gonna look 10 years from now? So that brings us to just being conscious in our recovery and choosing how to make better life choices. When did you discover that though? When did you discover like, wait a minute, I may be replacing one addiction for another?
It didn't take long, right?
It didn't take long.
Like, even though it was all those 5 years, right? Like,
Right.
so I call these things pacifiers,
Okay.
right? In
Okay.
my work, I call, like in the work I do when I work with clients and stuff, I always call them pacifiers because nobody wants to be told that they're using coffee and they're addicted to it because they're drinking it every day, right?
Right.
Or their work or cleaning or exercise. They don't want to call it an addiction because it's good for you. And it's like, all
Right.
right, well then you're pacifying yourself in one way or another. For
Right.
me, so I was a cutter, like looking at yourself in the mirror while you're bleeding, right? Like that wakes you up kind of quick just to be like, is this what I want to be doing? And then,
Right.
that those first 5 years, most suicidal in my life,
Wow. Okay.
right? Like most suicidal, right? Like the suicidal thoughts came quick and fast, and would keep coming. Um, of course there were phases that were good, months, weeks, whatever, but I still didn't like who I was. And once I got beyond that 5 years, like I saw things where it was like, maybe I don't need this. Maybe I don't need coffee. Maybe I don't need to drink pop the way or soda the way I've been. Maybe I don't need to go gambling. Maybe I don't need to do these things. And then when I would get rid of it, I would notice that it was an addiction. One time I was like, I'm not going to gamble anymore. And I quit gambling. It was great. A couple of years later, a friend of mine was like, hey, we're not doing anything tonight. Why don't we go to the fucking track? And I was like, boom. Like I went from just being like a little lethargic and like whatever, and to like, boom, there I am. And I was just like, oh yeah, we can go and like we can do this and that, like, right. And all of a sudden I was like, and my friend was like, we're not going, because she knew that I had a gambling problem, but she never saw it because she came into my life after I got sober. Right. And as soon as she saw me, when she was like, let's go to the boat or let's go to the thing, like go to the track, I was like, I turned into a different person. Wow. And then she was like, we're not going to do that. And it was things like that I was like, there are more problems behind this. And I'm still dealing with my pacifiers, right? Things that they aren't putting me in a state of giving everything up, but I'm giving up something. And the only way I'm going to know what that is by giving that up.
Wow, that's heavy. And it poses that deep question of when is enough, like the depriving ourselves of happiness, like what does that look like to maintain recovery? Like after a while, are you just going to lose that ability to live? Because like, again, there's many points in my recovery when I realized I was becoming a very young, stiff old man, right? So to say, because my girlfriend is young, beautiful, wants to party. She's like, we haven't went dancing in years. We don't go to the club. You never want to go to the club. You never want to go out. You never want to go to party. So I went from being the party guy to being totally opposed to it. And I think somehow in my mind, doing the work and healing, I just lost the desire. It wasn't even part of the protocol. I just was like, I changed into this new thing, this new person. So now I was when I say it's hard to explain, like going back into our past, but it's clearly night and day. So for someone who knew me for the majority of my life, they're like, it's just an unrecognizable person. It's like, you're so different. And I changed so much because I suffered and went through so much in my addiction. It was so crazy that my brain just totally made me into this new person. Now I have to make peace with that. But I also have to catch myself and say, well, can I relearn how to go out and dance? Can I relearn how to move? I used to be a full-blown professional dancer. I can't even move. I lost my rhythm. I just don't know where it went. I changed. I'm very rigid now. I go out, I'm like this. When I used to be like, let the music play, let the red split and dancing, and it's crazy. And I had a conversation with someone where I was really blunt and said, look, I don't care if you don't like who I am now. I'm at peace with it. And I'm this new guy and I'm still trying to learn myself, right? What is it to you? And the person was just trying to remind me, is like, well, it's somewhere in you has to be that Pop we know, because the Pop we're talking about was the kid before addiction. You was this big, exuberant person. So somehow it's this personality shift. Again, I went from my 20s to being in my 40s. I'm 41, not the same person anymore. But we have to ask ourselves, are we giving up too much? Are we being too hard on ourselves? And when is enough where we desire we can live again without the addiction being on our back? It's a tough one. It's a tough one.
No. I want to make sure that I express it properly, or what I want to express. I don't think it's a tough one. I think it's tough to understand. I maybe. Let me take a minute. Is our not doing about what is the core purpose for not doing something, right? And that's what we want to look at. We want to look at, am I living a life in restriction, right? Am I living a life where I am not allowing myself to be happy? Because I'm going to tell you, I don't drink so that I can be happy.
Brilliant.
Right?
Right.
So I don't have the desire to listen to music very much in my life. I like quiet. I don't, like there are times where I will purposely listen to something,
right,
but it won't be something that I just have on all the time, filling space.
Right.
That's pacified. Not paying attention to it, don't care about it.
Yeah.
I don't listen to music to be happy.
Okay.
Right? When I do listen to music, I listen to music to be happy. If you're not going to the club because you don't want to, then you're not going to the club to be happy.
Right.
If you want to go to the club, nothing is stopping you.
That's right.
Right? And so there's a difference between, am I approaching this in a way that I am resistant to it? Maybe you will find there is resistance to going to the club. You can address that when you find it. At the moment, what I'm hearing is that I don't want to. Like BFD, right? Like, and so this is what that becomes difficult for people when they are caught up in the addiction, because they don't know the difference between happiness that is given to you through substance, through experience, or happiness that is coming from you. Because the experience of the club is one that is wrought with addiction. Music, sound, changing the atmosphere of all the people, so community and all of these things, and the lights that are changing all the time. What it's doing is it's making your brain flash a lot. Right. And you're becoming attracted to that. I'm writing an outline now to do an interview with Dr. Anna Lemke. I don't know if you've heard of her.
No, I haven't.
She wrote the book Drug Dealer MD, and it's all about the opioid, how the opioid crisis kind of came to be. And I am writing, and in this outline, it's all about businesses aren't going out of their way to make you addicted. They want to sell things. And it just happens to be that in order to sell things, we have to get you addicted.
All right. Absolutely.
And so businesses, all sorts of businesses, clubs, alcohol, the internet, like
food.
If you and I promote a social media post, that promotion goes into an algorithm that is contributing to the addiction of our neighbors.
Heavy, powerful, man. Powerful.
Right. And that's and we are complicit to subjecting our neighbors to addictive tendencies because we want to make money, because we want to be known. But making money and wanting to be known are addictions that we carry because we have been told for most of our life that having a lot of followers, having people listen to you, like being an influencer will make you money, and having money is something that you want. And all of that is just when we get sober, we can see that that's not happiness.
Right.
And that's not security. And that's not my future.
Brilliant, man. That's heavy, man. Thank you for clarifying that. And thinking back now, I know why I don't like going to clubs and stuff, because everyone else they're using alcohol as a social lubricant to create this environment, right? So it's like, well, I don't want to participate in that because
what's in it for you?
Yeah, there's nothing in it for me, and I know subconsciously I'm not going to drink, and then I'm not going to want to.
Consciously you're not going to drink.
Yeah, so consciously, correct, and it's just like, you have to make peace with this new life, and you have to know the difference, right? And I do find happiness in other ways. So I love that, man. I love that. That was real heavy. Thank you for that clarity there. Just that hits home, man, because for everyone that's new in recovery, or even people that seasoned, these are the thoughts and the realities we have to navigate. And just even social media, I did a podcast with social media addiction. Now I have a second phone now, just for like, now I have days where I just keep the phone off, where I'm like, well, I just don't want to deal with right now. I need to have this kind of like detox from social media. They had this new concept that's interesting called the dopamine detox, which is taken out of context for most people, but I thought it was interesting. Is where people like detach from like things that make them happy, or things that they think they're a little bit too addicted to. So they'll stay in nature, they'll disconnect from their phones, and they'll do this for a certain amount of time to bring down, I guess, their dopamine levels, just their expectations, or just uncontrolled excitement or need to be in. And I thought about that a lot with what we're doing, and even myself, that discipline, saying, well, I'm gonna meditate this week, opposed to just binge watching Hulu or something like that, having these parameters set. It's just important to our recovery. So ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening, just look deep into yourself and find out what's working for you. What are you using? How are you using your recovery? And try to find these loops. I know some things for me is healthy, like coffee is not healthy for me. It just makes me more anxious, and it plays on the nervousness. I want to jump a little bit to mental health, because that's very important, right, in the community. You talked about a lot, like the cutting, somewhat. I didn't hear themes of depression, but being a healer.
I was cutting myself. I was drinking. I was going to the game. Like it was all. It was the. I hated myself. Like, so yes, like there's like depression, like it wasn't a debilitating thing because I was using stimulants and because I was doing other stuff, right? Like, but it was there.
Yeah, as a healer, on the healing side, mental health, depression, anxiousness, all of this stuff, PTSD, trauma, maybe our childhoods, how you talk about your relationship with your dad. Do you think all of that kind of contributed to the depression, the mental health, and the addiction, and your healing, is that a factor into it? Because I think there's a connection between alcohol, drugs, and mental health and addiction. And depression.
Yes, I've realized that I want to create those things that I needed when I was younger. And I'm constantly trying to create those things. And I'm always missing the mark, right? Like to some degree. Like I don't think, like, one of the things, like one of the reasons that I do my podcast, one of the things that really kind of hit home early in sobriety, I was a driver. Like I just, not for anybody, I just liked to drive. And I was driving my car, I drive a couple hours north and then come back. It was nothing. It was just like, I'm just going to go out and drive and think. And I flipping through the radio or whatever, and I came across a religious station, and it was, it's entertaining to listen to things that you don't normally listen to.
Right.
And this preacher was talking about how, like, you hate your dad because you keep reliving the stories that help you hate your dad. And like, I realized that what I was doing was every morning waking up and like reminding myself of why I hated my dad. Even though I hadn't seen him in almost a decade, I had fresh memories that I was re-engaging all the time. That is, because that happened to me, that's kind of why I do my podcast. Because my podcast is spoken and a little, like, about just like, here's a little tidbit, here's a little thing, right? Like I'm creating that which I needed and that which kind of affected me when I was younger. And so when we talk about, like how did all of that affect what I'm doing today? It's everything, right? Like all of those things. I talk about a thing, I don't know if I ever talked to you about it, pre-karmic buffet. If I talk to you about this,
let's get into it. I love
this is a
that.
good one. Okay, so stick with me.
I will.
Before your person, that which is pop, entered your body, you and God went down a buffet. And in that buffet, you picked out the most delicious things. And in that was, you know, worthiness. Like I believe that there was a really beautiful dish in the world buffet that was racism, and that we all picked up a little bit of.
Mm-hmm.
And we all have to eat that. We all have to, in our lives, we have to experience that. One of the biggest problems with buffets is that they're all you can eat. So you just pile up, and you pile up this self-hatred, and you pile up all of these delicious looking things as your karma. Mm-hmm. And you pile these things up, and that's yours. You have to, this is your meal of life. You go back to your table, and God kind of tallies it up and goes, all right, so this is what you want. Your best route to eating all of this is with this family. Mm. And you go there. And then you go in, and now you have these big piles of emotion, big piles of energy, big piles of things that you have to go through in your life. And if you can look at all of the things that you have to suffer in your life as just part of the buffet you picked out, it's a lot easier than like, oh my God, I got to deal with some shit. Just be like, wow, like how delicious is it going to be to approach this new depression? And it's not something that you're going to be in forever. It's just something you have to eat.
You have to eat.
Damn, I didn't fucking like you take that minestrone or whatever, and you're like, oh, there's no beans in it or whatever. It's just like, well, still what you pick, right? Like, and so that's kind of how I look at like living life, and it's all there. Like, you didn't, as a 16-year-old, pick something else. You picked it a long time ago. Now it's just starting. Now you got rid of that one layer of something, and now you're at another layer of something. And it's all the same. And so no matter what you do, you are you.
Wow.
And that is, again, like that, it just keeps coming back to this. We want to recover you, because like it's in there and you've never known it.
You never known it. Right. I love that. And when you say that, it makes me think about the importance of processing pain, processing trauma, and processing our emotions, because this is where a lot of the trouble starts, especially with mental health and addiction. Dr. Gabor Mate, I'm sure you heard of him. He always talks about all addiction stems from some form of pain, right? And that's one idea of it. Everyone has different ideas, but we don't necessarily, in a healthiest way, address the pain, the trauma. And then now they're saying like the body keeps the score, because the unprocessed emotions and unprocessed trauma just gets us in puts us in an unhealthy state, physically, mentally, and a lot of these emotions have to be worked out. And that's why I like that. That's why the podcast is important for us, helping people, really uncover, like you like to say, the truth, and like recover towards some form of reality, being vulnerable. And it's so deep. And thank you for being vulnerable there. You were touching on a lot of stuff, your past, dad, being a cutter and stuff. And that brings me to my next thing. As a teacher, you have a concept that you pose to your students called emotional stability, right? And I love this because when I was looking through, all of the beautiful things that you have going, again, ladies and gentlemen, for me to put this in context, we know MartinJon is a recovery mentor, healer, artist, teacher, and also a Reiki Master. So you really did a lot of spiritual work along the way. So can you talk to us about the importance of emotional stability and how you help your students, deal with that?
So part of that is this idea of but the idea of the pre-karmic buffet comes into this, right?
Yes,
Like,
right.
if you can think of it just a little different, emotional sobriety is achievable.
Mm,
You're emotionally unstable
mm,
when you're addicted to your anger, when you're addicted to your hate, when you're addicted to your frustration, when you're addicted to all of these things, right? And so what we want to do is we want to achieve some sort of neutrality. We want to be the observer, not the thing. Like, when people say I am mad, they're like, they are embodying mad,
right.
right? Rather than being like, that made me feel angry, because that's really what happened,
Correct.
right? Now, if we can approach our lives from a place of more neutrality rather than ownership of what's happening, and like I said, like, this is just the buffet that you picked out. Like, it doesn't have anything to do with you, right? It's just like, this is your work for life. You are working towards bettering life for others. So
Right.
you have to get through your plate,
Right.
right? Because if you don't, someone else is gonna have to eat that shit, and you picked it, right? It's just gonna
Right.
get cold and gross, right?
Oh, right.
So that's part of it. One of the big things that I talk about is understand that if you're experiencing something that you don't like, that means there's something about you don't like. So once you're done blaming someone else, you got to do the work of going back and figuring out, what about you is that reflecting? Too many people want to say, it's not me, it's just you, you did this. I mean, our president does this like fucking mad, right? He's never done anything, right? Like, oh, and 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 when you don't do that personal work, when you don't take a step back at some point, look, I don't care if you go punch someone in the face. That's fine. We've done it. More people are going to do it. It's going to happen. But when you get home, go, why did I get that mad? What probably happened is you're addicted to being angry and physically lashing out, and you're not in touch with that at all. And you don't even recognize it. And once you make that littlest thing go, like, this is an interesting thing. I didn't want to do that.
Right.
Just saying, I didn't want to do that, even if it's 3 days later, rather than defending the fact that you did it. Well, he did this and he did this and he did that, and so I punched him in the face.
Yeah.
But it's like, right, but is that what you wanted to do? And then a lot of people, they double down like I did on my alcohol and drugs and say, yes, that's what I want to do. That's who I am. I'm this kind of person. And if I don't do that, I'm not me. Well, then you're addicted. Right? And that's fine. You're fine. It's all right to be addicted to shit. Like, we all get addicted. Like, we are living in a world where everybody is an addict and nobody knows it.
That's heavy. Right.
And the moment we can start becoming emotionally sober, then you're not going to become emotionally sober if you're drunk, and you're not going to become emotionally sober if you're high. You're not going to become emotionally sober if you're addicted to porn and fucking internet and all of these other things. You're not. Because there's not going to, as soon as you start to think that I was wrong, you'll be able to pacify that thought with whatever you want. So there is no way to do that without, like you said, like getting some sort of a dopamine, like retreat, or a dopamine like reduction, so that you can actually feel like, now I can add awareness to what I'm doing. But if you can't add awareness to it, you're not going to get anywhere, and that's fine. Like, you just have you got a different buffet. That's all.
That's it. That's deep. So you have emotional sobriety, emotional stability, and I like to add emotional intelligence to the mix. I just really learned about this on how not letting other people's emotions affect your own inner sanctum. So it's like the example people use is like, if I walk into work and I'm extremely happy, I'm having a good day, and my coworker comes up to me and they just unload on me. They're having a bad day. They had a bad meeting with the boss and they think the boss is going to fire them and the boss is upset. Now, if you don't have a certain level of emotional intelligence, that energy is going to affect you. Now you're going to start thinking about, well, what if the boss is going to fire me? Then your idea about the work environment is going to change, your mood is going to change, and now you're having a happy day within a 5-minute period of absorbing someone else's energy. And the point of understanding your emotional intelligence is being able to look at someone else's issues and say, I understand that, but not absorbing that, creating a safe defense and being able to say, I could process my emotions, and I could understand the difference between someone else's emotions. So if you're angry, that shouldn't affect me or shouldn't cause me to be angry if I don't want to be angry. So knowing the difference with that will help. Go ahead. I see you want to say.
I want to riff on that just a bit.
Yeah, no problem.
So yes, you are right. They do not have the ability to change your day, right? Like they shouldn't. Like you should not give them that. A little bit ago, I mentioned if there's anything that you don't like out in the world, there's something about you that you don't like.
Right.
So if I allowed them to do that to me, I can blame them and be the victim of their actions. And that's fine. A lot of people do that. And we've done that for centuries. Right. Now, but if I was affected by it, I don't have to be.
Right. But
how do I not be when I'm obviously being affected by it? Right. Correct. And that's where if something outside of you is going wrong, something in you is going wrong. I'm gonna riff on this story just for the sake of trying to get an explanation out of what I mean by recovering yourself.
Perfect.
So you upset me because you came to me and told me you were going to get fired. Now, all of a sudden, I'm thinking these things.
Right.
When I ask, all right, why did my coworker tell me?
Mm-hmm.
And in my head, I'm like, well, he told me because he and I or she and I do the same work. And maybe, I don't know, I'm just making all this up. Correct. We do the same work, and they know, right? He knows that I've been slacking this last week, and he's worried about his job. Mm-hmm. But I know I've been slacking. Now, I can get mad at him for bringing this to my attention. But if I were doing my work, I bring it all back home. I say, he told me that because he noticed that I was slacking. And if he goes here's my mind going, if he goes to the boss, he's going to tell the boss that I haven't been doing my work, but he hasn't done work for 6 years or whatever the whole time. Like he doesn't even know enough. He doesn't know as much as I do. And I start defending myself.
Right.
All of a sudden, all of these thoughts are starting to come in, and I'm able to, if I'm able to calm down from blaming him or her or whatever, I can start to see the line, let's say, okay, what is the core problem? The core problem is I don't feel safe in my job.
Right.
Let's just say that's what it is.
Correct.
I don't feel safe in my job. Wait, that's what he was arguing with me about. That's what he came to tell me about. If I don't feel safe in my job, guess what I'm going to see in the world around me? People that aren't safe in their job, and people that are reminding me that I'm not safe in my job because I'm reminding me that I'm not safe in my job. This is on your buffet plate. Feeling safe. It's probably not, it probably doesn't have anything to do with feeling safe at your job. It probably has to do with feeling safe in your relationship. Probably has to do with feeling safe on the street. Probably has to do with feeling safe in your home. And I bet if you were to just recognize, go sit down and say, okay, this motherfucker came out and was telling me some shit, whatever, and it pissed me off. Let me look, where does that resonate with me? Where does that resonate with how I see myself? It's like, I don't feel safe in my job.
Wow.
Well, if I don't feel safe in my job, well, why? And it doesn't mean you have to stop and you have to go and try and be safe in your job. You have to find out what safety means to you, because safety comes from here. And if you're getting safety from your job, your relationship, your family, and other people, other places, your drugs, your alcohol, your gambling, your sex, your whatever, that's going to go away. and you're going to be left feeling unsafe. So your goal is to figure out where it's hurting you. And I'll tell you, the more you go out in the world and you can process that which you don't like about both yourself and others, and you can process it down to a point. And this was just me making it up. And like when I work with clients, this is what we do, which is why I only see my clients 4 times, because it's like, once we find it, you go live your life. You go find it yourself, because I'm not going to just be on your shoulder helping you out. I can't be. Codependency in this world is everywhere. And it's like, I don't want to contribute to it at all.
That's amazing. That's powerful, man. And I hear a lot of, in the theme of how you're speaking, I see a lot of taking accountability and ownership and actually doing the self-work and just being aware that you always are playing a role in every situation, whether you realize it or not, right?
Well, you experience everything in your mind. Right? Like, you don't exist really for me.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you are living your own life.
Correct.
Like, for me, what I hear, what I see, what I interact with is me. Because I'm processing everything with my brain, and my brain can only process me, because that's all it's ever processed.
Correct. That's powerful, man. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, we listen to MartinJon Garcia, bringing it on the Sober is Dope podcast. Man, listen, I want to thank you for that. That's a lot of beautiful things. Few more points I want to touch on that I think really stood out to me. You talk about, well, you have something called the portrait method, right? Right. And and it stems from the Portrait Project being the groundwork, which led to the portrait facilitation and the portrait method, right? And this is where, you talk about sharing and vulnerability and people opening up to explore their inner blocks. So what I was interested in, and also teaching and helping people find their own emotional stability that we was talking about. I just want to talk about the portrait method and how you utilize your art and everything with your clients to uncover these fundamental aspects of themselves. And could we elaborate a little bit more on the inner blocks that we have to deal with?
Well, the inner blocks are just like we spoke about, right? Like when someone comes to me with their issues, and I feel like I'm a victim because of their issues, right? Like, if I feel like a victim to the president, then that shit, like, I'm a victim somewhere. Right? Like, if I feel like a victim to anything, like, that shit is there. That's deep. And I was trained to do that. I was trained to be a victim, right? And I learned to be a victim, right? I prefer learned to having been taught. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, take your time.
My cat's been trying to get out of my room.
It's all good.
So there's a difference between learning and being taught. If we want to say my parents taught me ABC, well, then we're the victim of having been taught.
Okay.
If we can say I learned ABC, then we can take responsibility for changing that learned pattern.
Correct.
And the story that I told a couple minutes ago about the guy at work and stuff, like, my block was that I was happy, and the motherfucker came in and made me all upset. Like that's a block. Like I have to be able to sort through that block, but I have to be able to see it first.
Got it.
Right? So the portrait method is, like I mentioned earlier, everything you experience is you. So even if I just draw a line on a page and hand that to you and say, that's you. Whatever you see, whatever you experience, however you react to that is you. Right? Now I make good portraits, right? Like realistic kind of, because I'm not a schlock, but they're not meant to be flattering. And when you look at it, you have an experience, because now you're looking at a painting of you. Not to mention that that painting took an hour and a half to make, and I'm sitting here having a conversation with you. And that conversation is often just me pulling from you information, and you're going to utilize different phrases. You're going to focus on things. You're going to get, your emotions are going to go up and down, and I'm going to see all that. Not to mention, am I going to put it in the painting? It'll get there subconsciously.
Yes.
And then when you look at the painting, you're going to see something that I didn't make, because what I made, I can see. How you respond to it is what you see, which has nothing to do with what I made. And many people, I did a portrait of a woman once, 3 years after I made it. She was like, when you made the portrait, I loved it because you made it, but I didn't think it looked like me. Today, 3 years later, I look at that painting and it looks like me 3 years ago, as I remember myself today.
Wow, that's heavy. That's
so all of this stuff, like art is, and the reason that I became a Reiki master wasn't because I wanted to do Reiki, it was because I wanted to understand energy as it moves through space and as it moves through people, because I knew that what I was doing was energetic. Because one day, I write about my project, and the portrait project started in 2000. Is that a date that rings a bell?
yes,
Right?
Yes, yep, right.
So my portrait project was a big part of my sobriety as well.
Correct.
And today I would write about my portrait project a lot. I tried to get grants and stuff. I did get one, but it wasn't enough to keep doing, like in a real robust fashion.
Yes.
One day I decided, if what I believe is that my connection to people when I do their portrait is deeper than simply physical, meaning that I'm connecting with them on some spiritual weird level. Right. If that's true, I should be able to do a portrait of someone without ever having seen them and get a likeness.
Amazing.
And that turned out to be true. Right? So I started doing portraits of people without looking at them, and I started getting likenesses. That's what led me to Reiki. That's what led me to creating the portrait method. Now, the portrait method, first session is a portrait. We sit down, we do a portrait, I send it to you. You record how you feel about it. You record your thoughts and how it changes over time. Because the portrait changes, like everybody talks about how it changes over the first couple of days they have it. And I'll explain why in a second. And then we have a session that we talk about the portrait, but we also talk about things that we talked about in the first session, and we start to piece things together. The third session, we really start to tear it all down, and we get down to the core of like your stuff. Usually that stuff comes up before the third session. Fourth session is pretty simple energy work and kind of a little speech about like, this is what you learned. Let me wrap it up so you can reuse it. Okay. And then I let you go, and I don't want to talk to you for at least 3 months, because you have to live your life. If you're not out there living your life and you're seeing me every week, then that's a codependent relationship. Wow. And what I want to do is give you tools to go do your shit, do your work. Like and when I go in and I talk to IOP programs and stuff, like, one of the first things I say is, I don't care about your sobriety. What the fuck I care about your sobriety? Like I'm sorry, but like, if you go drink, that was your choice. Fuck, like even if it's a disease and all this stuff, I get it. Like, you go do it. But like, fuck all. Like, I can't. Even more reason for me not to care. Even more reason for me to separate myself more from your drinking, because you can't even control it. Why should I waste my energy on something neither of us can control? Right? So I don't care about your sobriety. I care about you and where you're going and what you're doing. And if you go drink and you have any inclination that I'm going to shame you, then you're going to lie to me. You're
Wow.
not going to be honest. And if I can tell you, look, I don't care about your sobriety. And I tell my clients all the time, look, if you drink, you drink. Shit ain't my problem. And my clients continually find new, like higher dates than they've ever seen. Why? Because I don't care about your sobriety. You do. And once you care about your sobriety, then it matters.
And it matters. Wow, that's powerful. I love it. I love it. Wow. And you started this back in 2000. And yeah. So can you tell us how did which came first, the Reiki or the portrait project? Or
The
what did
portraits. The portraits
oh,
came in
portraits.
2000. The Reiki
Okay.
only came in the last couple of years. That's 4 years or whatever.
And for you to get to the level where you're at, it's and the style of Reiki is Shippuden. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah. It should.
It's
Yeah.
it makes
I
you
don't even like.
well for
I'm
ladies he's being humble.
gonna explain. It's a. I chose Reiki because, and this may sound shitty,
Yeah.
because it is the most pedestrian of the energy field.
Okay.
Right? Like it's the most. It's the like everyone and their mother's a fucking Reiki master. BFD. I can do this over a fucking couple weekends. It was pretty inexpensive. I
Okay.
got I got my lessons, and I have this thing. The only reason I did it was so that I can have a vocabulary to do my work.
Okay.
I don't want to do Reiki on you.
Yeah.
I want to change your life.
Got you.
Right. And I utilized my Reiki training as just a way for me to shift from art to healing and be able to make my art a healing practice.
I love it. And then the means transmission of spiritual energy is just using that energy. I love it. Ladies
And being in an environment like that helped me understand it and help me speak about it separate from like, oh, but I want to do this. So what? Like you learn something and then you bring it into your life and you bring it into your practice.
Amazing.
It's not about doing one thing, right? It's about doing you. And that's what I keep doing. Like my portrait method's mine, recover yourself is mine. All of this stuff is just who I am.
Right.
Without the lessons, right? Like when I do Reiki, I'm not trying to fucking like do it right.
Right.
I'm just fucking like doing it, whatever that is.
You're incorporating it. I love it. Oh man. So Martin, you are amazing. You gave us a lot today. You came on. I feel the 19 years of recovery. You did the work beyond what I even knew. I learned so much today about myself, even how I judge people, even how I look at other people. I got to go and do a lot of work because we all have work to do. And being that I'm in my 8 years, and today you reminded me that not to be complacent, don't get cocky, don't get comfortable. You still have to always do the work and find that and bring it back to yourself and focus on yourself, the healing, and take accountability and do it. Thank you so much.
Before we go,
yeah,
I wanna, I don't know how this is all gonna wrap up, but I do want to say, like, I got 19 years. Like it's not where you're at. It's not where your listeners are gonna be at. It's not
right.
It's like you could approach everything you do from I recently interviewed this guy Theo Hardiman. He talks about the punitive criminal justice system and the restorative justice system. And the reason I did the interview was because we need in our lives for ourselves a restorative system, because that part of you that is judging other people and that part of you that doesn't want to do that are not in communication. You judge, and then you judge the judging. That's punitive. Just like you said, I got to change that. Right. You got to restore. You got to restore the relationship between these two parts of you. And we all have to choose if we want to live a life of punitive action, meaning we judge ourselves, meaning we hurt ourselves, meaning we tell ourselves we're doing the wrong thing, meaning there is no right answer for us because everything we do is going down the wrong path. Or a restorative process, which, yes, we're going to fuck up and BFD, like that's all right. We're going to mess up. But in that, we can restore the relationship that we have with ourselves.
Amazing.
Because if you can restore those two aspects, then you're going to find that instead of judging people, you're going to be able to love them, because these two aspects are in alignment. Currently, they're separate. Right? And just like us and spirit, we want to align. We don't want to continue to separate. There's like our entire lives, we've been told to separate things into two sides, right and wrong. Right. And the thing is that's punitive. And, you know, like when I talked to Tio, if you listen to that episode, like he talks about working in the prison. He found somebody, he murdered a woman, and he and the mother of that woman ended up embracing and talked to each other and are regular like communicators now, because they restored what was wrong. And when asked if he would like to get out of prison, he said, no, I'm here to do my time.
Wow.
Because it's different, right? Like I'm getting emotional. Like there's like this, there's a punitive aspect to like our living our lives. But there, if we want to be ourselves, we cannot judge ourselves from that place. We have to accept where we're at and restore what we can.
I love that.
And so like if you're out there judging yourself, trying to figure out what's right and wrong and all that, like that's immediately like as soon as you go, wait, I just don't want that. I'm not trying to defend it. I'm not trying to defend my judgment. I'm not trying to if you have to come up with a reason why drinking is right, then maybe you should stop. But you can't do that if you're in a punitive space, because if I judge your drinking, that means all the drinking I did in the past was wrong, and I'm going to be punished for it. And that's where people often get to. They get to a place in their minds where it's so punitive that they continue. They stay out in the street longer than they need to, because they're trying to continue making the mistake that they that they made, because there is no restorative. And if most of the justice that we see on the news and our neighborhoods is punitive, then the justice we believe in our minds is punitive, which is why I'm all for restorative justice. Yes, okay, we need punitive like criminal justice, sure, right. But we got that. We've had that forever.
Correct.
What we need is restorative justice, because we need to restore ourselves. We need to restore our neighborhoods. We need to restore our community. Correct. We need to restore our country, for Christ's sake.
That's right. That's right. And I think, and that's the most beautiful, eloquent way I could relate that to relapse. When I try to talk to someone who relapsed, I explain to them, if you're not, this is the most gentle time, and you're going to have to be the most gentle on yourself in this moment to reduce that amount of shame, because you're going to have the shame, but that shame and stuff is what keeps someone binging for another year or two, opposed to getting right back on the wagon. And what I really specifically try to teach on the podcast, and with anyone that goes through it, I'm like, look, my job is to explain to you that this is part of the recovery. It's not an excuse to relapse. You know, I'm not playing where it's like, if you slip, as part of recovery, so I'm gonna slip because it's part of the process. That's not what we're saying. We're saying is you have to look at it for what it is, kind of like not beat yourself up to the point to where it's detrimental to the recovery, and get back on track. And I think that's punitive versus restorative. And I think that's so beautiful. And now I have a better way of explaining it, because I was developing this in my mind as I talked to people, because that was my problem. I had the best intentions, but I was human. I made mistakes. I relapsed, but I felt so I felt so crappy, and how everyone else made me feel. I just didn't have the skills to say, okay, well, I had a bad night. Let me try to get back on track. I just let it implode and implode. And next thing you know, 2 years later, I'm super rock bottom, walking on the street, losing a house and everything. A lot of that could have been fixed if I was a more restorative, loving understanding to why I did it, and with myself. So thank you for that. I mean, I love that, because that's how we save lives, right? Yeah. I always talk about between rock bottoms is where we lose millions of people. All right. Everyone try to say you have to hit this inevitable rock bottom, and that's punitive. Because it's like you got to keep suffering until you can no longer suffer anymore, and hopefully have the spiritual transcendence to bring you back to recovery. I'm like, yeah, but millions of people die on that process. Let's try to get them back on the wagon as soon as possible. So
and some of these people don't even have addiction problems. Some of these problems, like don't even have what we consider traditional like DSM-5 addiction problems, right? The diagnostic manual, of mental health disorders or whatever, right? Like I was talking to that Dr. Anna Lamke today, and I told her, I was like, look, if we're waiting for the DSM-5 to tell us what an addiction is, then we're just behind the curve.
Correct.
And we want to be ahead of the curve. We want to
be ahead of the curve, and they're looking to us to really define it. They're looking through case studies and patients, and
That's right.
But I love the DSM-5. That's a diagnostical statistical manual. Without that, that's how they measure all the mental health disorders and everything and categorize it. Martin, I mean, this is an episode that was a long time coming. We really needed this. I feel like this puts a really good cap. 2020 has been a tough year. You gave us a lot of tools and insights. I think people's going to unpack this episode for years to come. So thank you so much. Can you just let the audience know where to find you and how they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, MartinJon.com is the easiest place. MartinJon. That's the easiest way to get in touch with me. MartinJon on Facebook, on Twitter, on MartinJon. That's my shit. Like MartinJon. And I, even MartinJon at MartinJon.com is my email. And yeah, hit me up. I regularly release the Recover Yourself podcast, which is on 10 to 12 different outlets. Most of the outlets that you listen to podcasts probably there. Just give it a search, Recover Yourself. I do workshops for for counselors and clinicians to earn continuing education units in Illinois and Indiana. I'm spreading that to other states. These are digital. Those workshops are awesome. So even if you are not professional, this is huge work and great work around recovering yourself. There's a great exercise in it. It's a 3-hour workshop, talks about the brain, talks about how we can do that work that I walked us through when we did the office scenario.
Correct. Ladies and gentlemen, you heard it from the man himself, the myth and the legend, MartinJon Garcia. Martin, thank you so much. I love you, brother. I'm glad we're on this journey together. One thing I can say about my recovery, it brought me to you, and we're all on the same, we're getting there together. You're listening to the Sober is Dope podcast, ladies and gentlemen. I love you all. Go in peace, and I'll catch you guys on the other side.